Hello, welcome to Adventures in Dolls, the United Federation of Doll Clubs YouTube channel. Today, our program is titled A Fresh Regard for Old China Dolls, and it's presented by Jennifer Stewart. If you've been enjoying our programs, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss your next adventure in dolls. Now, let's get to the program.
Okay, well, I am Jennifer Stewart, and welcome to my presentation, A Fresh Regard for Old China Dolls. I am so happy to be able to give this presentation today. I've been studying and collecting antique China dolls for about 12 years, and I'd like to share some of what I've learned and admire about these dolls. So you've been to a doll show, an antique shop, a doll club, or a doll collector's home, and you've seen China dolls. Were you intrigued? Did you think they were plain and dour looking and they all looked the same? Or did you find an element of beauty and an echo of their time in history in their countenance? Perhaps you have seen or owned China dolls that were your grandmother's or aunt's childhood dolls. A multitude of the so-called lowbrow China dolls were made in mass by the Hertwig Porcelain Factory from about 1890 to 1930. And these are the ones that are common to find today, being readily available at antique shops and online shopping sites. Yet the realm of China dolls encompasses so much more variety, and indeed, with their molded hairstyles, they illustrate almost 100 years of history in fashion and playthings, beginning in the 1840s and continuing even to the present time. What is a China doll? No, we are not referring to a doll made in China, nor one with Asian ethnic features. Rather, think of your grandmother's China dishes and teacups. Yes, a China doll is one whose shoulder, head, and often arms and legs are made of porcelain clay that has been molded, glazed, and painted. They are known more formally as glazed porcelain dolls. They usually have molded hair and sometimes have wigged hair. The bodies of China dolls are usually made of cloth stuffed with materials such as excelsior or sawdust, horsehair, cotton, wool, or fabric scrap batting, or other more unusual materials. Sometimes the bodies are made of stuffed leather or wood, or the dolls can be all china. Porcelain production first began in China in the 7th century AD, and the methods remained a secret for centuries because for a porcelain worker to reveal the secret of its production was punishable by death. It is believed that Marco Polo first brought porcelain ornamental objects to Europe from his travels around 1300 AD. Tea that the English and American colonials have loved to drink beginning in the mid-17th century came from China. Glazed porcelain tea bowls and teapots were typically packed in the tea leaves for shipping to these places. Because the porcelain came from China, it became known as China. In 1700, the process of making porcelain by mixing clay with quartz and feldspar was discovered in Saxony, Germany. By 1710, white porcelain was being produced there, and within 40 years, there were at least 14 manufacturers of porcelain products in Europe. Porcelain production became well established in England as well, and the Staffordshire district became prolific in its production of porcelain dishes and ornamental objects. In the early years, Porcelain products were precious and reserved for the wealthy. Yet by the mid-19th century, porcelain was being mass-produced and was affordable for people of middle-class income. Before the advent of porcelain dolls, common materials for manufactured dolls were wood, papier-mâché, and wax. Dolls were made at home from cloth and other natural materials at hand. By the 14th century, Thuringia, a neighboring state to Saxony, was well established in the manufacture of toys due to the availability of natural materials, good roads, and transportation, and cheap labor. In the 18th and 19th centuries, figurines of well-dressed ladies and men, as well as little animals, were among the ornaments that were produced by the porcelain factories, along with fine tableware, tea services, and religious objects. It was not a far stretch for the statuette busts to be reimagined into porcelain shoulder heads that could be attached to a wooden or cloth body and to then be suitable for dressing. There is a record of a pre-1825 glazed pink porcelain doll head from the KPM Meissen mark being auctioned in 1973. So it seems that a few independently produced heads were made in the first quarter of the 19th century. Mass production of China shoulder heads first took place in the 1840s, though they were still relatively few in number. Their production in this early period was still experimental, and the dolls were made not so much as children's toys, but as fine art ready to move beyond the display cabinet. Ladies of leisure and girls in wealthy homes wanted figurines that were pleasing to behold and were more suitable to bring out of the cabinet to hold, dress, and to be admired for special occasions. By 1845 to 50, porcelain dolls intended as toys were on the market. These included China shoulder heads and all porcelain bathing dolls, commonly referred to as frozen Charlottes or frozen Charlies. A characteristic of note with China doll styles is the coloring. The very early art or ornamental dolls usually had brown hair. Some Chinas produced in the early decades had pink tinted faces. That and the ice white coloring of the high quality porcelain of the mid-19th century China dolls are desirable characteristics. And in the slide that's up here on the left, you can see two dolls that are pink tinted, one with brown eyes and one with blue eyes. And you can notice that the whites of their eyes are the white porcelain, and you can tell that the skin, the face around it is tinted. And then the two dolls on the right side both have that ice white porcelain characteristic. Most China dolls were painted with blue eyes. Oops, let me back up to that slide again. Most China dolls were painted with blue eyes. It is uncommon to find dolls with brown eyes, and the dolls of Kloster-Wielsdorf more frequently have brown eyes. Most commonly, China dolls have black hair. A few ABG or Altbeck and Gottschalk lady dolls have a darker blonde hair color known as Café au lait, and you can see the Café au lait color on your far right here. Beginning in the 1880s, blonde hair became more common for China dolls, with about 40% having blonde hair from that time forward. China doll molded hairstyles can fill a presentation just on this topic. For the most part, these molded hairstyles changed with the fashions and can be traced to the fashions in women's magazines, such as Godey's Ladies Book. However, it is unwise to date a doll precisely based on the hairstyle because China molds could be used for decades, and dolls were molded long after a hairstyle went out of fashion. The hairstyles did follow a sequential pattern. The factories that made the China dolls did not give names to the different styles. Also, they typically did not make dolls based on celebrities or characters. Rather, it was the early collectors of these dolls in the early 20th century who gave the different styles the names that we use now as a vocabulary by which to talk about them. Beginning in the 1840s, China doll hairstyles changed through the decades, with some overlap and longevity of some styles. Some of the earliest styles included buns, either braided or plain, and possibly with Queen Victoria-style loops around or over the ears, long sausage curls known as Lydia, and short sausage curls ending in an undercut ledge known as Sophia Smith. In the 1850s, the covered wagon style with more modest sausage curls became common. These dolls, in my opinion, always have black hair, and some have brown rather than blue eyes. In the 1860s, Nanking dolls, or those with inexpensive cotton bodies, were available as Damenkopf or lady dolls, and not as commonly as Kinderkopf or child dolls. The 1860s saw the covered wagon style evolve to the common flat top hairstyle, along with styles with a headband, including Alice and Dolly Madison, and styles with a molded snood. A few flat tops have blonde hair, and a few with black hair have brown eyes. The 1870s was the era of the fancy hair ladies with a wide range of styles, including many variations of puffs, rolls, and waterfalls. There was also a wide range of styles, including curly top, which you see in the center photo. And on the far right, you have spill curls in a cafe au lait and a black. And then you have snood and a looser bun on the far left, which are also included in the 1870s styles. In the 1880s, China dolls depicting children became popular. Blonde hair became more common, and curls were depicted in a variety of arrangements. The child dolls saw a change in the shoulder plate as well, having broader rather than sloping shoulders and indents indicating the beginning of the arm. They also have shorter necks than lady dolls. By the 1890s, Hertwig lowbrow dolls were produced by the millions, and the dolls that were common before that time were phased out. While China dolls were produced in the 1890s and into the early decades of the 20th century, their popularity waned as French fashion dolls and German dolly face and character dolls gained popularity for their more lifelike pigmentation and countenance. Some of the earliest porcelain factories that made China shoulder heads include KPM Berlin and KPM Meissen in Germany, or Königlich Porcelain Manufacture, Royal Porcelain Factory, Royal Copenhagen of Denmark, and Schlagenwald in Bohemia, or what is now the Czech Republic. These factories ceased production of China dolls early into the second half of the 19th century and did not participate in making China dolls specifically for the toy industry. An exception is that Royal Copenhagen relisted 3 of their 19th century shoulder heads, which were produced between 1977 and 1981 for the collector's market. Following these early porcelain factories that made fine ornamental dolls were numerous factories that produced China dolls intended as toys in a range of size, style, and quality, mainly as a sideline to their porcelain production. 7 main porcelain factories in Thuringia, Germany, are credited with making the majority of the antique China dolls that we find, as extensively researched by Mary Gorham Cromwell in her books and articles on German China dolls. These factories were J.D. Kessner, A.W. F.R. Kister, Kloster Wielsdorf, Conte and Boehm, C.F. Kling, Alt, Beck and Gottschalk, also known as ABG, and Hertwig and Company. Other German makers of China dolls include Dressel and Kister, Eberlein, Limbach, Gera Porzellanfabrik, May and Linder, Merz, Karl Tilsch, and Nymphenburg. In Bohemia, Schlagenwald made porcelain China head dolls. In Denmark, we have Royal Copenhagen, and in Sweden, Rörstrand. French porcelain manufacturers who made dolls include Jacob Petit, Blampoy, Hure, Gautier or F&G, and Romer. While the Staffordshire district in England is known to have made beautiful China figurines of children and adults, there has been no evidence found that China shoulder head dolls were manufactured in England. Marks on dolls or lack of marks. While KPM, Royal Copenhagen, and Dressel and Kister marked their dolls, most of the factories making China dolls in the second half of the 19th century did not mark their dolls. While a small number of China shoulder heads made by Kling may have the company's mark of a bell, this is not common. For the most part, the porcelain factories viewed the China dolls as a sideline and did not put a company mark on them. I have some dolls pictured here, mostly that we know the manufacturer based on the face painting style. So on the top level, you can see Schlagenwald, a Kessner doll, a Kister doll, Kloster Wielsdorf, and then I have one that is not unknown, but possibly Kloster Wielsdorf, and another unknown, possibly Eberlein. And then on the bottom row, we have a Conte and Boehm. We have a marked Dressel and Kister half doll, an Alt, Beck and Gottschalk, Kling, and then 2 Hertwig dolls. Some shoulder heads have an incised number on their back, and this usually indicates a mold number or size number, such as the doll, the second from the left. You can see an ABG Highland Mary, which has a 1000 times 11 marked on it. The second number is a size number, so you can find the Highland Mary with a 1000 times 0 or times 8 or times 10, and that second number is a size number. Furthermore, imports after 1891 were required to be marked with their country of origin, so German dolls made after that date and designated for export are usually imprinted on the back shoulder plate with Germany. This mark is common on Hertwig China dolls. And the second photograph from the right side does show a Hertwig doll, and imprinted on the back of her shoulder plate is Pat applied for Germany. I want to point out the two dolls on the far left, which are both older China shoulder head dolls where the clay has been pressed into the mold. So on the top far left, you see a doll with a very ragged interior, and you can especially see the roughness around her neck there. She has been pressed into the mold rather than later China dolls usually have a slip that is poured into the mold, and then when it's dried a little bit, it's the excess is poured out. So on the bottom here, you can see fingerprints where the clay has been pressed into the mold. And that particular doll has an inside on the, an incised 46 on the inside. So that pencil or paint marks, the numbers or letters that can often be seen inside porcelain shoulder heads are typically marks of the molder or the painter of the doll. They indicate within the factory what dolls a particular crafter worked on so that they could get paid for them. Since about the turn of the 21st century, research has helped identify many of the unmarked antique China dolls that were made in Germany. However, research is ongoing, and while many dolls can be attributed to a particular factory, there are still many that cannot be positively identified or that have been mistakenly attributed. Mary Gorham Crombles made yearly visits to Germany in the 1990s and visited all of the major factories before most of them were demolished. She also excavated shards to study from the factory sites and their dumping grounds. Her extensive research led to our current knowledge of face painting styles that were used consistently by the different factories. Many China dolls can now be attributed to specific porcelain manufacturers based on their facial painting. Yet some factories were in close proximity to each other and shared dumping grounds. This can lead to misidentification when examining shards from a particular location with several factories. Furthermore, some dolls were previously attributed wrongly. For example, the Grape Lady and Morning Glory styles were thought to have been made by KPM Berlin because of their fine quality. They are now attributed to Schlagenwald. It is now known that KPM always marked their dolls. Another difficulty with identification is that smaller factories often don't have a large enough extant sampling for comparison. Research continues by current knowledgeable doll experts, and China doll enthusiasts eagerly await new published material on China dolls, as most existing books on China dolls are decades old. Three categories are considered when we determine the quality of glazed porcelain china or bisque dolls. They are quality of the porcelain, quality of the molding, and quality of the painting. Porcelain quality has waned throughout the 20th century, mainly because porcelain clay is dug from the earth and supplies become depleted. For this reason, China dolls from the early to mid-19th century tend to be of higher quality porcelain than those dolls made in the late 19th and 20th centuries. Dolls with crisp molding details and fine facial features are higher quality. Factories used head molds for a long production period, which is one reason why hairstyles were produced well past their time of fashion. The heads that were produced from new molds had finer details. As the molds were used, they sustained wear and the details became less distinct. Also, Parian or unglazed, untinted bisque dolls usually have more distinct features than glazed China dolls, made from the same mold because the glaze fills in the finer lines and causes the features to become softer and less distinct. Face painting is ultimately what draws us to a particular doll or not. Each of the major factories producing China dolls had a distinctive style for painting their dolls' faces, and the painters were trained in that style. Subtle variations could change the look or expression on particular dolls. Typically, earlier dolls exhibit more refined face painting. As mass production increased, less time and effort was allotted for painting, to the point where many of the small dolls produced toward the end of the 20th century had merely a few swipes and dots of the paintbrush for a face. And in this slide, you can see some variations in face painting. The doll on the far left is a very small 6-inch doll, yet she has refined face painting. And again, on the far right is a 10-inch doll with very fine face painting. If you look at the doll, the second from right, well, she's one that just has some swipes and dots for face, just not near the same quality. When studying China dolls for identification, we look at the shoulder head and sometimes at limbs, as the different factories had distinctive styles for China arms and legs with boots. The whole doll, however, is an artifact for its time and place in history and is worth contemplating in its entirety. Body and clothing are part of the doll's personality and history. Since China shoulder heads and limbs were sold separately, as well as on commercially made bodies, China dolls can be found in original condition on a wide variety of bodies, ranging from narrow waist, firm commercial bodies to competently made or quite crude homemade bodies. Typically, a China girl or lady doll would wear white underclothing consisting of a chemise, drawers, and one or more petticoats. The dress would be cotton, silk, wool, or a blend such as challis. Girls in the 19th century were taught to sew from a young age, and they regularly sewed for their dolls. China dolls are often found with mother-made and child-made outfits to varying degrees of skill. Also, toys were scarce in the 19th century and were frequently passed down to cousins and nieces. It is not unusual to find China dolls in original clothing of a generation later than the doll because it was redressed by a younger owner in the same family. It is also common now to find China dolls redressed in the popular tradition of the 1970s in frilly polyester and nylon satin and lace. Let's talk about reproductions. How can you tell if a China doll is antique or a reproduction? It often takes study and lots of exposure to antique China dolls up close and in photographs. One way to do this is to browse antique China dolls on eBay and Ruby Lane. Even if you don't intend to buy, this is a way to see lots of dolls, sellers' descriptions, and their asking price. As stated before, the German porcelain factories had distinctive painting styles for their dolls, and with review, it is possible to become familiar with these typical antique styles. And again, the quality of the porcelain and painting is usually a tip-off for if a doll is a quality antique, new or mass-produced antique, or a reproduction. And in the slide here, I've got some examples. On the far left is an antique Lydia doll from the 1840s. And then the next photo over are two Lydia reproduction dolls of high quality, and those two are marked on the back. And then on the far right, there is an unmarked reproduction and an antique Hertwig curl on top doll. You can see the difference in the face painting with the reproduction on the left side of this photograph being, the painting is okay, but it just doesn't have the character of the antique Hertwig doll. And also you can tell that the quality of the porcelain is more murky and not near as good as the antique doll. One other thing to note here in the photograph on the far right is that the antique Hertwig doll is just slightly larger than the reproduction. The reproduction was probably made of the same of a mold taken from this antique or a similar antique doll, and then the clay shrinks, and so the doll itself becomes slightly smaller than the doll that the mold was taken from. Emma Clear and Mark Farmer made many reproductions of China shoulder head dolls in the 20th century. The dolls of both of these artists or companies are always marked. The quality of Emma Clear dolls is so good that they can be confused with antiques, and they are aging gracefully to nearly being antiques in their own right. So in this slide, you see an Emma Clear doll of the Grape Lady on the far left. And then next is an antique Grape Lady doll. And then next comes a Mark Farmer reproduction doll of a Hertwig doll. And the far right is an antique Hertwig doll of the same head style. So again, you can see the difference in quality, face painting, and in the quality of the porcelain. There is also a wide range of China doll artists who made China dolls in the 20th century and beyond. These dolls are usually, but not always, signed on the back. To add to the mix, ceramics as a craft became popular in the 20th century. And there are many amateur craft dolls on the market now. As with any doll collecting, look to the quality of the doll and choose what appeals to you. If in doubt about the age of the doll, seek the opinion of a knowledgeable collector. So who collects China dolls and why? It takes a deeper appreciation of the art and history of China dolls as compared to the pretty antique bisque dolls that are so popular now. Collectors with an appreciation of the medium of glazed porcelain with molded hairstyles, the changing styles of face, hair, and shoulder plates, and the history of the more common people who could afford these dolls in their time are those who collect China dolls. What do we collect, and where, and how? As with any doll collecting, China doll collectors keep what appeals to them and what they can afford. Hertwig lowbrow China dolls are plain and plentiful. They can be found easily in a wide range of quality, condition, size, and dress. They are relatively inexpensive, fun to play with, and rewarding to redress. Many collectors choose to move beyond the common Hertwig to search for dolls of other factories, decades, and styles. The antique German China dolls were made for over 90 years, and there is a much wider variety than is apparent from a quick internet selling browse. The search for particular China dolls can be long and elusive, and the better quality and older dolls can be costly. Also, many dolls found need renovation or redressing in appropriate antique or sewn from antique or reproduction fabric clothing. Repairing and clothing antique China dolls can be a fun hobby in itself. From the search for highest quality and price to lowest quality and price, try looking at doll auctions such as Theriault's and Withington. Also, doll shows and sales, especially the UFDC convention sales room, which is world class, and also regional sales. Ruby Lane Online, eBay, Etsy, and other online selling sites. And sometimes you can find antique China dolls at antique shops and thrift stores. China dolls are an intriguing niche in the world of antique doll collecting. These dolls originated earlier than bisque dolls, and the German antique China dolls have a production time of about 90 years. Having followed the mediums of wood, paper mache, and wax in the doll-making history of Thuringia and Germany, they tend to have a more primitive or rustic countenance than some types of antique dolls, rendering them appealing to collectors who have an affinity for the older and simpler antiques. While they are difficult to identify by maker, they are uniquely varied in their shoulder head, molded hair, and body styles, as well as in their wondrous variety of dress. How many China dolls are in your collection? I am quite sure that no two are alike. Now, I've included some references, and a sad note is that almost all of these books are out of print. They may occasionally be found on Amazon or eBay. So, China Dolls for Study and Admiration by Mona Borger. A wide variety of China dolls, including an impressive collection of early brown-haired Chinas, is shown in this book. Color photos of groups of dolls are shown full length, which gives a good view of the size and proportion of the dolls, as well as their costumes. Frozen Charlottes, wigged Chinas, and some glass-eyed dolls are shown. The doll heads are photographed front, side, and back view. A small sample of China legs and doll bodies are shown. Markings on the dolls are described although there is much speculation about unmarked and unknown marks on the dolls, as this book was published before Mary Cromble's research. KPM Dolls by Christiane Grafnitz. Grafnitz's beautifully illustrated book is written side by side in German and English. It is a comprehensive look at the history, time and place, production, and art of the dolls of KPM manufacture in Berlin. These dolls are rare, and this book allows a window to view them, as may not be possible in their physical form for most of us. It may still be available to order directly. Identifying German Chinas, 1840s to 1930s by Mary Gorham Crombolz. Mary's first book on China dolls is organized chronologically by decades when the dolls were made. It is an excellent resource for learning the many types of China dolls and learning how to distinguish by which factory an unmarked doll was made based on face painting characteristics, though newer research by China doll experts indicates that there may be some inaccuracies in identification here. Only the heads and shoulder plate are shown for most of the dolls, so bodies, limbs, and costumes are not part of the research in this book. A pictorial reference guide for German Chinas, also by Mary Crombolz. The newer book by Mary Crombolz is organized by factory, giving a better overview of the history of the 7 major Thuringian porcelain factories that manufactured China dolls. This organization is more intuitive for comparing dolls made by one factory. Again, some inaccuracies are apparent with newer research on the smaller Thuringian factories that made China dolls, which were not addressed in Crombolz's research. A page of painting characteristics for each factory is included at the end of each chapter, with a range of examples shown. As with the previous book, the focus is on the shoulder heads, not on the complete doll. Beloved China Dolls by Mildred Seeley. As the title infers, this book is much more personal than the others. It is perhaps my favorite one to pore over. Mildred Seeley's mother had a collection of China dolls. Though she collected antique dolls and made bisque and china dolls, it was late in life that Mildred decided to acquire a collection of chinas to accompany her family china dolls. This book showcases that collection, which has since been auctioned after her death. The dolls are each introduced, including Mildred's name for them, as friends might do when they get together to play dolls. There is some confusing speculation about the makers of unmarked dolls, as this book was also published prior to Mary Cromwell's publications on her research. The sections on the doll bodies, limbs, china cloth and leather, underwear, and costumes are exceptional. Mildred focused on the whole doll, and this book is the best resource I have found for china dolls in that regard. Hertwig and Company Archives, 1890 to 1937, by Florence Theriault. This comprehensive book on the Hertwig Company includes their production of china shoulder heads, as well as their other dolls and figurine products, including bonnet heads, snow babies, half dolls, bathing dolls, and all bisque dolls. And here's something about me. I fell in love with antique dolls the first time a little French bisque was placed into my eagerly awaiting hands when I was 4 years old. Beyond childhood dolls, I have been collecting dolls since I was 18 and began finding antique china dolls in 2011. I am a writer and editor with a BA in English and sociology and with an ardent love of history of the common people. I lived in Japan and the Far East for almost 9 years, and I have an affinity for antique Japanese dolls as well. I am the mother of 4 grown children. I consider myself to be a world citizen, and I currently reside in Oregon. I thank you so much for joining me with this presentation today, and I hope to hear from you again soon. Thank you.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed the program. We thank Jennifer Stewart for her kind support of our channel. If you're not already a member of UFDC, we'd like you to become one. Simply go to ufdc.org and click on membership and fill out the form. And when you do, be sure you tell them Karen sent you. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.